You're standing at the edge of a cliff. Below, the sea churns with a slow, violent rhythm, waves cracking against jagged rocks like the ticking of some ancient, unforgiving clock. Behind you lies a safe path, solid ground, but your gaze, your yearning, is fixed on the edge. You lean forward just slightly, feeling the pull. There is no logic in this pull, only something primal, something deep, something dark. Now imagine that cliff as a person, or a bottle, or a needle, or an argument, or a lie you keep telling yourself. What is it about human beings that makes us reach for the things that wound us? Why do we chase the thrill that shatters us? Why do we return again and again to the behaviors, the relationships, the thoughts that slowly, methodically dismantle us? We crave what destroys us, not by accident, not because we don't know better, but because part of us does know and still wants it anyway. The addict knows the cost. The lover knows the betrayal. The insomniac knows the price of the screen's glow at 2 a.m. The overthinker knows the mental spiral leads to nothing good. And yet, onward they go. This isn't about ignorance. It's about attraction. We're drawn to what hurts us the most, not because we are stupid, but because on some deep psychological or even existential level, we've mistaken pain for meaning, chaos for aliveness, destruction for truth. Is there something seductive about suffering? Is there a hidden logic, twisted, buried, subconscious, that tells us we deserve the hurt we reach for, or worse, that the hurt knows us better than anything else? How can you explain the child of an abusive home who grows into an adult that falls in love with violence cloaked in charm? How do you explain the person who finally finds peace, only to sabotage it with anxiety, suspicion, or boredom? How do you explain the comfort of old wounds? Perhaps the better question is this: what if the pain we chase is the only thing that makes us feel real? There's something eerie about how destruction can feel like home. Carl Jung once wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But what if the unconscious isn't just directing us? What if it's seducing us? We walk through life with a shadow, a hidden part of us filled with all the denied desires, unspoken fears, forbidden dreams, and unmet needs. And often that shadow doesn't whisper. It shouts, it demands, and it knows exactly how to get our attention. Through self-destruction. Have you ever caught yourself in the act of sabotage and felt a strange rush? Like somewhere in the burning wreckage, you finally saw yourself clearly? That is not just chaos. That is something deeper, something existential, something eerily close to honesty. So here we are, a species that builds temples to gods and weapons of mass death, a species that paints masterpieces and drinks itself into oblivion, that loves and lies, that dreams and decays. We are a contradiction walking on two legs, and the greatest paradox of all is this: we long for what we know will break us. But why? Why do we keep dancing with the flame, even after we've been burned? Why do we sabotage the very things we say we want? Peace, love, purpose, clarity. Why does pain so often feel like home? You're not alone in this. This isn't about weakness. It's about something far more ancient and universal, a hunger that runs through mythology, psychology, and our collective soul. And now, we must go deeper, beyond the surface, past the cliches, into the underworld of the human psyche. Because if we are to break the spell of self-destruction, we must first understand the sorcery that cast it. And that begins by asking a terrifying question. What if the parts of us that crave destruction believe it's the only way to survive? Let's begin in the dark. Not the pitch black of a starless sky, but the shadowed place inside every human being, the part we rarely speak of but always carry. Carl Jung called it the shadow self, the repressed, hidden aspects of our personality, our rage, jealousy, shame, lust, self-loathing. Everything we were taught to disown, deny, or deem unacceptable. We push it down, banish it into the subconscious, and pretend it's gone. But the shadow doesn't disappear. It waits, it watches, and it whispers. And one day you find yourself drawn to the very thing that reflects it. A toxic partner, a self-destructive habit, a thought that wraps itself around your soul like a serpent. Not because you want to suffer, but because that suffering feels familiar. It mirrors something buried deep in your inner world, something unresolved. It is here that craving and destruction merge. From a psychological perspective, the impulse towards self-destruction is not simply masochism. It is an unconscious attempt to reconcile the unacknowledged parts of ourselves. Freud described it as the death drive, thanatos, an instinct not for survival, but for dissolution, for escape, for a return to silence, to the void. Imagine a child who learns love through pain. Their parents' affection comes only after punishment, chaos, or emotional withdrawal. That child grows into an adult who doesn't trust peace, who sees calm as boring, happiness as fragile, and safety as suspicious. They seek intensity because that's how they learned love. And intensity often looks like destruction. This is not logical. It is emotional logic, the kind that's wired into our neural pathways through trauma, repetition, and memory. Neuroscience shows that the brain becomes addicted not just to substances, but to states, emotional patterns. If you've spent years in a loop of rejection, stress, or internal chaos, your brain begins to need that chemical signature, like a drug. So we reach for the flame, not because we love the burn, but because we no longer know who we are without the fire. Philosophically, this longing to be undone has haunted thinkers for centuries. Arthur Schopenhauer believed that desire itself is a form of suffering, an endless cycle of craving and disappointment. To live, he said, is to will, and to will is to ache. The moment we desire, we suffer. And yet we cannot stop desiring, even if that desire leads us to ruin. This becomes especially dangerous when what we desire is our own undoing, when we conflate self-worth with sacrifice, when we believe that love must be earned through pain, or that greatness demands torment, or that we are only real when we are hurting. This is the hidden problem. We do not simply crave what destroys us. We often believe it defines us. Jean-Paul Sartre, the existentialist, warned that we are often complicit in our own imprisonment. He called it bad faith, the act of lying to ourselves, pretending we have no choice, no agency, no other path. We embrace our suffering not just because it is familiar, but because it excuses us from change, from responsibility, from freedom. Because to be free means we must choose. And choosing means we can fail. It's easier sometimes to say, "This is just who I am," to wear destruction like a mask and call it destiny, to mistake our wounds for our identity. But underneath all of this lies an even deeper terror, the fear that we are unlovable without the suffering. Many people fear that if they no longer hurt, they will no longer matter, that their pain is the only thing that makes them visible in a world addicted to performance, perfection, and productivity. So we cling to the ache, the addiction, the chaos, because at least it reminds us we're alive. But this is not living. It's surviving, endlessly surviving. The philosopher Viktor Frankl, who survived the horrors of the Holocaust, offered a different path. He believed that meaning, not pleasure, not power, was the key to enduring suffering, and that even in the darkest conditions, we can choose how we respond, that our deepest freedom lies in that very choice. Yet even he acknowledged, sometimes people do not want to be healed, not because they enjoy their pain, but because they have built their identity around it. Their suffering becomes their story. Their destruction becomes their compass. This is the paradox at the heart of human craving. We want wholeness, but we fear who we'd be without our wounds. So we return to the cliff, not because we want to jump, but because something inside us remembers the fall. And it felt real. And now we begin to see. We don't just crave what destroys us. We crave what mirrors the brokenness we've refused to name. We crave the storm because it drowns out the silence. We crave the pain because it proves we still feel. But craving is not the end of the story. It is a signal, a compass, a call to go deeper. The question is, will we keep following it into the fire or begin to listen to what it's really asking for? Because beneath every self-destructive desire lies something sacred, something still hoping to be seen. The craving doesn't announce itself with fanfare. It murmurs, then organizes your days. It rearranges your friendships. It edits your memory. Quietly, it rewires what you expect from life. You think it's just a late-night impulse, a text you shouldn't send, a drink you shouldn't pour, a scroll you shouldn't extend. But consequences, like roots, travel far beneath the surface. They crack the foundation before any wall appears broken. Consider what happens inside the body. The nervous system, built for saber-toothed tigers and sudden storms, calibrates itself to your chosen fires. If you feed it chaos, it learns to keep the engine idling hot. Cortisol becomes a background hum. The amygdala, your alarm, fires earlier, louder, longer. The prefrontal cortex, the careful future-facing part of you, tires. Decision by decision, you become more impulsive, less patient, more certain that the next fix is necessary. It isn't mere pleasure you chase, it's salience. The "this matters now" signal that dopamine stamps onto your attention. The brain begins to prefer intensity over integrity, because intensity feels alive and integrity feels slow. Inside that circuitry, small biases become tyrants. Negativity bias nudges you to overweigh threats. Confirmation bias keeps you loyal to your favorite pain by noticing only the data that justifies it. Intermittent reinforcement, the casino schedule of rewards, turns relationships into slot machines. One sweet message among weeks of coldness, one apology after months of disregard, and your brain experiences a jackpot. The unpredictability etches the bond deeper. You call it chemistry. The lab calls it conditioning. Your heart calls it destiny. The truth is more ordinary and more devastating. Your identity shifts by degrees. You stop saying, "I am someone who," and start saying, "I guess this is just me." The craving becomes a passport you must show at every border, at work, in love, at the mirror. You make choices that fit the story. Sunk cost fallacy whispers. You've invested too much to leave now. Learned helplessness mutters. Leaving wouldn't matter anyway. You confuse endurance with loyalty. You confuse numbness with forgiveness. You confuse the ability to function with the right to keep going. In relationships, the craving looks like storms you secretly schedule. You pick fights when the evening gets too quiet because quiet threatens the narrative. Peace exposes the hollowness you've been avoiding, or you chase the unavailable. People, dreams, ideals, because the chase is safer than the catch. The moment someone offers you steady warmth, you flinch. Your body mistrusts the very medicine it claims to seek. Too easy, you say when you mean too unfamiliar. At work, destruction dresses in ambition. You crave impossible goals because failure keeps you feeling honest. Success terrifies you. It requires receiving without earning through pain. So you overcommit, romanticize burnout, and praise yourself for surviving schedules that consume you. The culture cheers. Productivity isn't just rewarded, it is sanctified. You call it drive. Your nervous system calls it siege. Years later, you do not know how to rest without guilt. You do not know how to stop without feeling like you've disappeared. Society offers templates for this suffering and sells them at scale. The attention economy fattens on outrage and envy. Algorithms learn your agitations and spoon-feed them back. Your bias becomes a personalized buffet. The platforms don't need to know what's true. They only need to know what keeps you. So you are kept by doom scrolling, by comparison, by 1,000 micro-injections of not enough. The invisible consequence is that your baseline for reality shifts. Crisis becomes your circadian rhythm. Ordinary tenderness no longer registers as signal. It reads as static. Even spirituality can be recruited by the craving. You seek ascension through self-erasure, confusing humility with self-hatred. Or you pursue mystical fireworks and ignore the quiet, ethical work of kindness. You call your compulsions tests, your avoidance surrender, your self-punishment purification. The sacred becomes a stage where your shadow performs in white robes. The craving also colonizes time. You postpone the new life until one more catastrophe confirms you deserve it. You wait for rock bottom, as if suffering must grant permission to heal. But rock bottom is a moving target. It lowers itself to meet the bar you keep raising. Meanwhile, mornings blur, friendships thin, birthdays arrive like questions. You keep promising to change when things settle. You never notice that chaos has negotiated a lease inside your calendar. Health bends under the weight of repetition. Sleep shrinks. Digestion protests. Skin becomes a map of stress. The body stores unsent letters. It communicates in headaches, tight jaws, and sudden aches that don't match your age. You treat symptoms as inconveniences, never as messages. You forget that your immune system listens to your story and adjusts its courage accordingly. There are social consequences too, quiet as dust. People who love you adjust their orbit. Some stay, learning to tiptoe around your chosen flame. Others leave, accused of betrayal for refusing to watch you burn. You declare yourself abandoned, which proves your thesis. I am unlovable. The circle tightens, craving, consequence, self-belief, more craving. A perfect closed system that manufactures the very evidence it fears. And then there is the politics of the inner life. When destruction becomes a lifestyle, nuance dies. You are either angel or monster, breakthrough or failure, chosen or forsaken. The middle ground, where repair and learning happen, feels intolerable. You start to speak in ultimatums and think in verdicts. Curiosity withers. Without curiosity, transformation has nowhere to sit. Strangest of all, the craving begins to confound your memory. The hippocampus records what repeats. The more you rehearse a story of damage, the more accessible it becomes. Not because it's the whole truth, but because it is the easiest shelf to reach. You forget the hours you were brave. You forget the ordinary afternoons where nothing hurt. You forget how to notice goodness without interrogating it. The past becomes a museum curated by your worst moments. You tour it daily. And while the consequences explode outward, their center is heartbreakingly simple. Your life becomes a negotiation with your own aliveness. You ration joy as if it must be paid back with interest. You mistrust love because you cannot invoice it. You become fluent in agony and illiterate in gentleness. This is the cost of craving what destroys you, not just pain, but the loss of a language you were born speaking, the language of enough. It's tempting to call all this fate. It is easier to admire the architecture of your ruin than to imagine tearing it down. But look closely. The structure is maintained by habits, reinforced by stories, power supplied by attention. And attention, even when hijacked, can be reclaimed. There is a moment, quiet, disloyal to the usual gears, when you ask, what if I am wrong about who I am? The question itself is treason against the kingdom of craving. It opens a small door in the wall, and through it, you can see a field that isn't on fire. What would it mean to step there? Not as a grand gesture, but as a defection, away from dramatized harm toward unremarkable wholeness. The consequences have told their story. The nervous system has testified. The culture has confessed its appetites. The court is adjourned. Now comes the rebellion. Something in you already knows that the craving is a lie, knows that destruction, no matter how seductive, never delivers the wholeness it promises, knows that peace isn't weakness, and chaos isn't truth. But knowing is not enough. The craving doesn't die with awareness alone. It dies with rebellion. And rebellion in this case is not loud. It is not rage. It is not fire. It is quiet, subtle, and defiant in the most sacred way. It begins with this one radical act, refusing to abandon yourself again. Let that settle. Refusing to abandon yourself. That means no longer choosing people, habits, or patterns that demand the sacrifice of your dignity, your clarity, your peace. It means sitting still when every fiber in your body begs you to chase the old high, the toxic love, the hit of validation, the chaos that feels like home. It means choosing boredom over breakdown, stillness over spirals. It means choosing discomfort that heals over pain that familiarizes. This is the beginning of reprogramming the mind and body, because your craving is not just emotional, it's neurological. Your brain has built highways around suffering. The rebellion is choosing to walk through the woods instead. Slower, weirder, unfamiliar, but life-saving. It will feel wrong at first. Healing often does. If you've lived your life seeking the fire, calm will feel cold. If you've only known love through pain, safety will feel suffocating. If your identity is built on survival, rest will feel lazy. But this is where the battle is won. Not in dramatic transformation, but in the tiny decisions that say, I am worth something different. Jean-Paul Sartre said, freedom is what you do with what's been done to you. The rebellion is in that doing. It's in breaking the chain of inheritance, traumas passed down like heirlooms. It's in choosing a different story than the one written in your childhood or carved into your past. It's in recognizing that the craving is not you. It is just a voice that once helped you survive. But survival is no longer the goal. Living is. You do not have to become your patterns. You do not have to finish the story just because you're already halfway through. You are allowed to put the book down. You are allowed to change the ending. And this is not just philosophy. It is practice. Here are the rebel acts no one will applaud but will save your soul. Saying no when you used to say yes to please. Leaving the room when the energy turns toxic, even if no one else notices. Turning off the phone when anxiety itches at your fingers to check, compare, spiral. Writing a new story of love that isn't adrenaline-fueled but soft, slow, and mutual. Sitting with your pain instead of numbing it. Not to wallow, but to listen. To ask it what it's trying to tell you. Forgiving yourself for every time you chose the fire. Because you didn't know any other warmth yet. This is not glamorous. It is not fast. But it is holy. You will fail at it. Often. You will relapse into old patterns, return to old cravings, but each return will feel emptier. Each relapse will last shorter, because something in you has already begun to wake up, and once you have seen the lie, it is harder to keep believing it. This rebellion is ancient. The mystics called it awakening. The Buddhists call it liberation from attachment. The Stoics called it freedom through discipline. The existentialists called it authenticity. The psychologists call it integration. You can call it whatever you like, but it begins in the moment you stop waiting for destruction to validate your existence. The world won't understand this at first. There will be pressure to return to your old role. The tortured artist, the chaotic lover, the sacrificial child, the anxious achiever. But you are not an archetype. You are not a performance. You are not a myth of suffering. You are a person. And you are allowed to want peace without earning it through pain. Let that be your rebellion. Let that be your fire. Because here's the hidden truth. The most rebellious thing you can do in a world that profits from your self-destruction is to love yourself anyway. Imagine waking up one morning and realizing the storm has passed. Not because the world outside has changed, but because something in you has. You're not chasing chaos. You're not scanning the horizon for danger. You're not feeling that old ache that says, if it doesn't hurt, it isn't real. And it hits you like a slow dawn. You no longer crave what destroys you, not because you fought harder, not because you became stronger, but because you finally stopped believing that destruction was your proof of existence. You stopped mistaking pain for passion. You stopped mistaking drama for depth. You stopped mistaking suffering for identity. This is the ultimate truth. The craving was never about the thing. It was about the feeling, the recognition, the echo. You weren't drawn to the chaos itself. You were drawn to how it reflected you, to how it saw the wound in you and whispered, "You belong to me." You wanted to be known, that's all, even if it meant being known by something that would burn you down. But here's what the craving never told you. You can be seen without being destroyed. You can be loved without being torn open. You can be whole without bleeding first. There's a version of you on the other side of that craving. Not a perfect version, not a saint or a guru or an idealized self, but a real one. One who no longer measures their worth by how much they can endure. One who doesn't build temples to their trauma. One who can hold both the past and the present without letting either define them. This is what Viktor Frankl meant when he said, "Between stimulus and response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose. The ultimate truth is found in that space, because the craving, the compulsion toward self-destruction, is not destiny, it's a door, and you have the power to close it or walk through it. You realize that freedom isn't found in intensity. It's found in inner stillness, in not needing the fight to feel alive, in not needing to prove your worth through pain, in no longer defining your identity by your ability to suffer well. That's the quiet revolution. To wake up and feel peace and trust it. To have a healthy relationship and not sabotage it. To want something soft, sustainable, and slow, and not feel shame for that. You don't need to be broken to be interesting. You don't need to be hurting to be deep. You don't need to suffer to be worthy. That is the ultimate realization, that you can end the war within you, that you can choose again, right now, always, that the self who once chased destruction did so out of love, a misguided, inherited, wounded love, but love nonetheless. So maybe don't shame that version of yourself. Maybe thank them, because they kept you alive until you were ready to live, and now you are. You see, you were never the craving. You were the one watching it, the one questioning it, the one deep down always whispering, there must be more than this. And there is. There always was. You were just too busy surviving to believe it. But now the fog clears. The mirror cracks. The old story fades. And you see yourself clearly for the first time. Not broken, not bad, not addicted to pain. Just ready. Ready to let go. Ready to write a new story. Ready to remember who you were before the craving began. And who are you now? You are the silence after the storm. You are the breath between the sobs. You are the open sky where the thunder used to be. You are the truth behind the craving. You were never meant to be consumed. You were meant to be free.